He heard her before she came into the room. The service elevator at the end of the corridor made a sound he had cataloged in the first week of living here, a particular settling of the mechanism, a quality of arrival that was distinct from the main elevator and from the freight lift, and from the sound the building made at night when the structure contracted in the cold. He had cataloged it the way he cataloged everything in his environment, automatically, precisely, without deciding to. He was on the couch when the elevator settled. He had been on the couch for 40 minutes, which was not something he did in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and the fact that he was doing it now without being able to account for why was information he had not yet processed. He closed his eyes before she came through the door. Not because he was asleep, because the appointment had been scheduled, and he had been briefed on the appointment, and the brief had said Tuesday at 2. Dr. Park's technician, Boney's hip assessment, expected duration 45 minutes, and he had read the brief and had filed it, and had apparently spent 40 minutes lying on the couch waiting for it, and had now closed his eyes because the alternative was to be a man sitting on his couch watching a veterinary technician arrive, and he was not going to be that. He heard the door, the specific sound of someone who had been given an access code and was using it correctly, not tentatively. The sound of a professional who had been briefed on what to expect and was going to meet the expectation. He heard Boney register her arrival, not a bark. Boney had not barked in 2 years, but the specific percussion of arthritic paws on hardwood, the particular rhythm of a dog whose back left hip caught on the 4th step, which he knew because he had memorized it. He heard her say, very quietly, "Hey, sweet boy. Hey, let me see you." He heard Boney's tail. He kept his eyes closed. She moved through the apartment with the contained efficiency of someone who knew her job and had been told not to disturb the owner and was honoring that. He tracked her by sound, by the soft placement of a kit bag on the floor, by the direction of her voice as she oriented Boney toward the window, by the specific quality of her movement that was gentle without being slow, purposeful without being loud. The window light. She had taken Boney to the window, which was, he did not move. He did not open his eyes. He cataloged this the way he cataloged everything. Correct. The window light in the afternoon was the best light in the apartment. He had known this about his own apartment, and had not known that anyone else would know it. He was still thinking about this when she began to sing. It arrived before he registered it as a decision she had made, before he understood it was happening. It was already happening, low and unhurried. A melody that had no form he recognized and no words he could identify, just a shape. A recurring phrase that resolved on itself in a way that felt like something being set down gently rather than something ending. It was not performed. It was the sound of a person doing a thing they did naturally and without audience, the sound of a private act, the sound of something he had not heard, not this quality, not this specific thing entering a space rather than passing over it, in 3 years. He understood, in the space between one breath and the next, that if he moved, it would stop. He did not move. He lay on the couch in the Tuesday afternoon with his eyes closed and his breathing measured, and Boney somewhere at the window, and this woman, this person he had never spoken to, whose name was on the appointment brief, and who he had not been thinking about, singing the song that had no name in the apartment, that had been silent for 3 years. And he held himself completely still, and he listened. He counted, later, 22 minutes. He did not move for 22 minutes. The apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Lakeshore Drive that had been built in 1927 and had never been updated in a way that changed what it fundamentally was, which was the specific architecture of a space that had been designed to be permanent. High ceilings, deep-set windows, rooms that had been intended to hold things for a long time. He had lived here for 9 years, which was 5 years longer than he had lived anywhere else in his adult life, and the apartment had in that time become so precisely calibrated to his presence that it was difficult, some mornings, to distinguish between the apartment and himself. This had been a source of comfort before. He had stopped examining whether it still was. He had moved here with his wife, So Yeon, who had described the apartment on their first viewing as the kind of place that listens, and had meant it as a compliment, and had been right. She had filled the listening with music, not background music, not ambient sound, but deliberate music, chosen and present and played in the evenings when the lake light changed and the apartment did the thing it did at that hour, which was become larger somehow, as if the sound gave the space additional dimension. She had been dead for 3 years. The apartment listened now, and there was nothing for it to hear. He had bought Boney 5 months before she died. At her insistence, she had always wanted a dog, and they had always been about to. And the about to had finally resolved into a specific Tuesday in October when she came home with a 7-week-old Jindo mix in a carrier and said his name is Boney in the tone of someone who had already resolved all the questions. He had not been consulted. He had looked at the dog, who had looked back at him with the specific gravity of a very young creature who understood the situation was serious, and he had said fine and had meant it as a concession and had been wrong about what it was. Boney had been his, in the way things were his, completely, without drama, as a fact of his existence that required no explanation. When Soo Yeon died, Boney was the thing that had to be fed regardless, the thing that needed to go out regardless, the thing that had a schedule that preceded the silence and continued through it and asked, every morning, without asking, that the day begin. He did not know how to account for what Boney had cost him, and what Boney had made possible in the same sentence. He had not tried. He maintained the dog's care with the same precision he maintained everything, and he had not looked directly at what the maintenance meant. The hip had started in October. Not serious yet. Doc Park had been clear about this. The inflammation was manageable. The arthritis was early stage. The prognosis was good with consistent treatment. The treatment was weekly for the first month, then bi-weekly, then assessed. He had agreed to the weekly schedule and had not examined why he had agreed to a more intensive schedule than the minimum required. The mobile practice sent different technicians. The first visit had been a man named Toms, who was competent and quiet, and who Boney had tolerated with the dignified resignation of a dog who understood medical procedures as necessary indignities. The second visit was supposed to be Toms again. The brief had said Dr. Park's technician, Celestine Dumont. He had read the name and filed it, and had spent 40 minutes on the couch before she arrived, and had closed his eyes before she came through the door. He was not going to examine why. If you're new here, welcome home, quiet storm chasers and soul-deep feelers. Drop a like, subscribe, and tell me your city in the comments. Every one of you who keeps showing up makes it possible to keep building worlds like this one. Get somewhere still. We're going in. She finished the examination at 2:47 p.m. Boney's hip was responding to the treatment, which was not a surprise. It was a well-managed case. The inflammation markers were down. The range of motion was slightly improved. She made her notes with the thoroughness she brought to everything, because notes were the record, and the record was how you tracked change over time, and how you knew whether what you were doing was working. She gave him his pill, tucked into a fold of the prescription soft food that the practice provided, the specific formulation that Boney had accepted on the first visit, and that Celestine had noted in the file as preferred delivery method. And she watched him take it with the uncomplicated acceptance of a dog who had been managed gently enough that he had no reason to be suspicious of the people managing him. "Good boy," she said. She put her hand on his silver muzzle, which was her grandmother's gesture. The specific placement, the weight of the palm, and she felt, as she always felt when she used it, the particular combination of presence and absence that grief produced. Her grandmother had been gone for 8 months. The gesture was still there. The gesture would always be there. She tidied the area near the window. She capped her supplies. She looked at the apartment, which she had not been examining, not because she was incurious, but because examining a client's space without their invitation was not something she did, and she allowed herself one moment of registering it. The apartment listened. That was the quality she noticed, the specific architecture of a space that had been built to hold sound and was currently not holding any, and the particular quality of that not holding, which was different from the not holding of a space that had never had sound in it. This was a space that remembered. She put on her bag. She looked at Boney, who had settled near the window with the satisfied sigh of a dog whose pain had been attended to. "Same time next week," she said. Quietly. To him, not to the room. She left. He waited 4 minutes. Then he got up from the couch and went to the window where she had worked, and he stood there, and he looked at Boney, who looked back at him with the 7 years of specific gravity, and said nothing. Because Boney never said anything, but always communicated accurately. He called the veterinary practice at 3:04 p.m. He asked for Dr. Park. He was told Dr. Park was with a patient. He said he would hold. He held for 7 minutes, which was not something he did, and when Dr. Park came on the line, he said that he wanted the treatment schedule extended to indefinite weekly visits, and that he wanted the same technician who had come today, and that he would like this arranged as a standing appointment on Tuesdays at 2. Dr. Park said this was certainly possible, and that Celestine was his best technician, and that Boney was responding well, and he thanked Dr. Park and ended the call. He stood at the window for another 3 minutes. The lake was doing what the lake did in the late afternoon in November, going silver and specific and completely honest, the way the lake was always honest regardless of whether you wanted it to be. He thought about the song that had no name. He thought about 22 minutes of not moving. He thought about the apartment, which had been listening for 3 years and had just, for 22 minutes, had something to hear. He did not examine this directly. He was not ready to examine it directly. He filed it in the place he filed things he was not ready to examine, and he went to his desk, and he worked until 8 p.m., and he fed Boney at 8:15, and he stood at the window again at 9 o'clock, and looked at the lake and understood that Tuesday was 6 days away. 6 days was manageable. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. She came back the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock. He was on the couch. He had been on the couch since 1:40 p.m. He had been aware since approximately 1:35 p.m. that he was going to be on the couch, and he had not done anything with this awareness except let it be true. He closed his eyes at 1:58 p.m. She came through the door at 2:01 p.m. "Hey, sweet boy," she said. Same words, same register, the specific quality of a greeting that was genuine rather than performed, the greeting of someone who was glad to see this particular dog. Not glad to be seen being glad. He listened. She took Boney to the window. He heard the kit bag. He heard the soft assessment sounds, the specific vocabulary of a physical examination conducted by someone who narrated it, very quietly, to the animal being examined. "Good, that's good. Does that hurt? Yeah, okay, you're doing well. You're being so good." And then the song, arriving as it had the first time, before he registered it as a decision, already present by the time he understood it was happening. The same melody, the recurring phrase. the quality of something being set down gently. He lay on the couch and he breathed slowly, and he listened, and he thought about nothing. This was unusual. He was a man whose mind was always working, who had trained himself across 42 years to process continuously, to never let the analysis stop. Because the analysis stopping was when things were missed, and missed things in his world had consequences. He lay on the couch on Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, and he thought about nothing, and he listened to the song that had no name. 24 minutes. She had stayed 2 minutes longer than last week. He filed this. He did not know why he filed it. He filed it anyway. The third Tuesday. He was on the couch at 1:45 p.m. He had stopped accounting for this to himself, had stopped noting that it was unusual, had stopped doing anything with the awareness except arriving on the couch at 1:45 in the manner of a man who had agreed, internally, to a thing he was not ready to name out loud. She came at 2:01 p.m. Boney went to her. This was new. Boney had not gone to Tom's, had tolerated Tom's from a position of dignified reserve. Boney went to her. He heard it. The percussion of the arthritic paw on the hardwood, the catch on the fourth step, the sound of a dog moving toward rather than awaiting. He heard her laugh, low and surprised, and then, "Oh, you remember me, of course you do. Come here." He kept his eyes closed. The examination, the song, 26 minutes. When she left, he lay on the couch for 7 minutes. Then he stood and he went to where Boney was, and he sat on the floor next to the dog the way he had not sat since So-yeon, on the floor, with no furniture between himself and the animal. And Boney put his silver muzzle on his knee, and he sat there, and he looked at the lake, and he allowed himself, for the first time in 3 years, to feel the specific quality of the apartment, not as silence, but as space. Space that was waiting to hold something. He was not ready to fill it. He sat on the floor. On the fourth Tuesday, she said, "He's already at the door." He had not moved quickly enough. He had been on the couch, as he was on the couch, and she had come in, and Boney had done what Boney had been doing, with increasing enthusiasm across 3 weeks of Tuesday visits, had gone to her at the door, at the catch, on the fourth step pace that was becoming, he noted, slightly less caught. And she had said it before she registered that he was awake. He was awake. He was sitting up. He had not been ready. She stopped. He looked at her for the first time. He had heard her for 3 Tuesdays. He had built from sound alone a picture that he was assessing this automatically in the way he assessed everything, partially accurate. The voice he had heard was present in the face. The specific quality of the gentleness was in the face. The thing he had not been able to build from sound, the eyes, which were the eyes of someone who was accustomed to looking at frightened things without frightening them, and which were looking at him now with the same quality, steady, undemanding, present. She did not perform surprise at finding him awake. She did not perform anything. "Mr. Yun," she said. "Professional, unhurried. I'm Celestine Dumont. I've been managing Boney's treatment for the past 3 weeks." She held her kit bag in one hand and looked at him directly. "He's responding very well. His range of motion has improved measurably, and the inflammation markers are down." "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Boney, who was leaning against her left leg with the specific confidence of a dog who had made a decision about someone and was not reviewing it. "Do you want to be in the room?" she said. Not the performed question, not the client management version. The real one, the question of someone who understood that some people wanted to watch their animal be treated, and some didn't, and that both were legitimate. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She moved to the window. She got Boney settled. She began the examination. He watched her work. He had watched people work in his professional life more times than he could count, had watched lawyers and strategists and operations managers, and the full range of human competence as it applied to the things his world required. He knew what skill looked like. He knew what genuine care looked like, though he encountered it less often. And he knew the difference between someone who was performing care and someone for whom the care was simply present. Her hands on Boney were the second kind. He watched her work and he listened to her work. The quiet narration to Boney, the specific warmth of it, the way she registered his responses without making them more than they were, and he did not hear the song yet, because she was not singing, and he understood, without deciding to understand it, that she only sang when she thought no one was listening. This was information he was going to have to do something with. At the end of the examination, when the medication had been administered and her notes were made, she looked up and found him still watching and did not perform anything about being watched. "His hip is genuinely improving," she said. "The weekly cadence is working. We could probably move to bi-weekly in another month." "Keep the weekly schedule," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He held the look without managing it, which was not something he did often. "All right," she said. She latched her kit bag. She looked at Boney. "Same time next week, Boney." Boney's tail responded. She was at the door when he said, "Miss Dumont." She turned. He had not planned what came next. He did not generally speak without having planned what came next, which was itself information, the second anomalous data point of an afternoon that was producing them with uncomfortable frequency. "You sing to him," he said. She was very still. "During the examination," he said. "The last 3 weeks." He watched her process this, the specific sequence of a person understanding that something they had believed was private was not. He watched her decide, across approximately 3 seconds, how to respond. She did not apologize. She did not explain. "Does it bother you?" she said. "No," he said. She looked at him. The steady eyes. "It regulates their nervous systems," she said. "Consistent sound at a low register. It's more effective than silence during an examination." She said it practically, the clinical version. And then, without quite deciding to, "My grandmother taught me." She sang to everything. Plants, animals, people who couldn't. A pause, brief, specific. "I kept the habit." He held this. "The melody," he said. She looked at him. "It doesn't have a name," she said. The words from a series of other conversations she was not a part of, said with the same truth. It's hers. It was hers. Present tense corrected to past. The correction visible in her face. "How long?" he said. She understood what he was asking. 8 months, she said. He was quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, plain, the way he said things he meant without performance. She held the words for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She was at the door. "Miss Dumont," the second time. Also unplanned. She turned again, and this time there was something in her expression. Not impatience. Not its opposite. Something more like the look of someone who is paying full attention and is curious about what the full attention is going to receive. "Next Tuesday," he said. "I won't be on the couch." She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her read this accurately. He could see her reading it, the same attention she brought to Boney, to the frightened animals, the look that registered without demanding. "You don't have to change anything," she said, "for the appointment to work." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." The look held. Then something shifted in her expression, the specific quality of something landing that had been aimed honestly and had arrived. "Same time next Tuesday," she said. She left. He stood in the apartment for a long time. Boney settled near the window. He looked at the lake. He thought about 3 years of silence and 22 minutes and 3 Tuesdays of lying still and the specific quality of the apartment's air at 3:07 p.m., which was different from the specific quality of the apartment's air at 1:58 p.m., and he thought about what the difference was. Sound had been here, sound that entered rather than passed over, for 22 and 24 and 26 minutes at a time. For 3 Tuesdays, the apartment had been holding something. He had not corrected the silence in 3 years. He had managed it. He had managed it with the competence he brought to everything, and the silence had stayed manageable, and he had not let himself understand the distinction between manageable and healed. He was beginning to understand the distinction. She thought about the conversation on the drive home. She thought about "I won't be on the couch" and what it meant, which was clear in the way that clear things were clear, not requiring analysis, just present, available to anyone looking directly at it. She thought about a man who had been very still for 3 Tuesdays and had chosen to remain still and had now told her he was going to stop, and that this was not a clinical accommodation, but a communication. She thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother had understood something about people that Celestine had been learning to understand all her life, that the way a person treated a frightened animal was the most accurate thing you could know about them. Not the most important thing, the most accurate. A person could perform many things. They could not, if they were not paying attention, perform how they spoke to a frightened animal. Boney was not frightened. Boney had not been frightened since the second visit, which was faster than most animals with new handlers. This told her something. The way a dog attached told you something about the attachment the dog had been taught to expect. She pulled into the practice parking lot and sat in her car for a moment. She thought about 8 months of carrying her grandmother in the song, about the grief that had no form she could put it in except this: the melody in the window light, the hand on the muzzle, the specific continuation of a way of being in the world that had been given to her by someone who was gone. She thought about an apartment that listened. She had noticed it, the quality of the space, the specific way it registered sound. She had noticed it and had understood it as architecture and had not understood it as absence. Now she understood it as both. She went inside and finished her notes and drove home and made dinner and called her mother and did not say anything about the apartment on Lakeshore Drive or the man who had been lying on the couch, or what it meant that she had known he was there. She had known since the second Tuesday. The changed quality of the room's attention, the specific way the stillness had orientation. She had learned in 2 years of making house calls to animals whose owners were present and silent to feel the presence even before she confirmed it. She had felt it. She had continued singing. She had continued because the song was for Boney and the song was for herself, and she had not let herself think about whether it was also. In some way she was not ready to account for the man lying still on the couch who had not wanted it to stop. She was a woman who arrived at truths in the right order. She thought this one was getting close. The 5th Tuesday, he was at the window when she arrived, not on the couch. Standing at the window, which faced the lake, his back to the room and his hands behind him in the specific posture of a man who has decided to be visible and is managing how. Boney was at his feet. She came through the door at 2:01 p.m. Boney's tail moved, but he did not leave his person, which was its own information. Boney was telling her something about the configuration of this Tuesday, about what this person needed today. She honored it. She set her kit bag down. She crossed to the window. She stopped beside them, not across from, beside, and she looked at the lake, which was doing what the lake did in November, which was telling the truth. "He's doing well," she said, not about Boney's hip, or about Boney's hip and also about something else. "Yes," Yoon Dae-seong said. They stood at the window. "You've been in this apartment for 9 years," she said. She had looked it up. Not surveillance, due diligence, accurate information before decision, and she said it because she thought he should know she had looked, and because she was not going to pretend only one thing was happening when two things were. 9 years, he said. "Your wife," she said. "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. The specific quality of his quiet, the managed stillness she had been learning across 5 Tuesdays, had something different in it today. Something that was not quite the usual management. 3 years, he said. "I know," she said. 8 months for me. She felt it as she said it, the proximity of the two losses, the different scales of them and the way scale didn't, in the feeling, mapped to size. Different thing. She was my grandmother. Not the same. Grief doesn't scale the way people say it does, he said. She looked at him. She thought about the song, about the apartment that listened, about the distinction between manageable and healed. "No," she said. "It doesn't." Boney made the decision then, patted to her with a catch on the 4th step and leaned against her leg, then patted back to Dae Seong and leaned against his leg, making the geometry of the three of them explicit in the way dogs made things explicit. She felt something ease in the room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes, the first Tuesday," she said. "You were on the couch. You weren't asleep." A pause. "No, you knew I was going to sing." "I didn't know," he said. "I hoped." He said it plainly, the specific precision of a man who used accurate words for things that cost him. The first visit, Tom's came. He told me the technician who would be taking over the case sang to the animals during treatment. He mentioned it as a clinical note. A pause. I read the note. She held this. "You read the case notes," she said. "I read everything related to Boney's care," he said. It was not defensive. It was the statement of someone for whom reading everything was a mode of caring. "And you decided to be on the couch." "I decided," he said carefully, "that if I was in the room and awake, you might not." He held her gaze. I wanted to hear it. I was not willing to make it stop before it started. She looked at him. "You faked sleep for 22 minutes, she said. 22 the first week, he said. 24 the second. 26 the third. She looked at him. He looked at her. The November lake behind the window, honest as it always was. She said, "I knew on the second Tuesday." He was still. The room's attention changed, she said. When someone is in a space and present in it, genuinely present, not sleeping, the space has a different quality. I work with animals. You learn to feel presence before you confirm it. She held his gaze steadily. I knew. "And you kept singing," he said. "I kept singing," she said. The silence between them was not the managed kind. It was not the 3-year kind. It was the kind that existed when two people had said the true things and were in the same space with them, not needing to do anything with them yet. Boney moved to the patch of afternoon light near the window and turned 3 times and lay down in it with the satisfied exhale of a dog who had engineered the situation he wanted and was at rest. She looked at the dog. She looked at the man. "Same time next Tuesday," she said. "Yes," he said. Something in his voice, the quality of it, was different from the 4 previous Tuesdays. Not the managed version. The other one. The one that had been there in the 22 minutes of stillness and was here now in the afternoon light with nothing to be managed. She picked up her kit bag. She moved toward the door. She stopped. She turned back to the window, to the lake light, to the man standing in it. She sang 4 bars, the beginning of the melody, the opening phrase, the one that named itself and then waited for the rest. She sang it quietly, for the room, for the apartment that had been listening for 3 years, and had been holding something for 5 Tuesdays. She sang it and she held the last note for a moment and let it go. She left. He stood at the window for a long time. The lake. The late afternoon. The specific quality of the apartment at 3:09 p.m., which was, he was assessing this, not because he had chosen to, but because his mind assessed things, and had just assessed this. Not the same as it had been at 3:07 p.m. before the 4 bars. The 4 bars were still there. Sound traveled and dissipated, but the apartment was the kind of space that held what it received for a moment before releasing it, and in that moment, he could still hear it. He sat on the floor. He sat the way he had been sitting on Tuesdays since the 3rd week, on the floor with Boney. No furniture between himself and the animal, and now also no furniture between himself and what the animal represented, which was everything that had required being fed and walked and cared for when caring for things, had become the only available form of being alive. Boney put his silver muzzle on his knee. He put his hand on Boney's head. His wife's gesture, that he had learned from watching and had never used until after she was gone and had been using ever since. The specific placement, the weight of the palm. He sat in the apartment that had been listening for 3 years. He sat in it, and he breathed, and he let himself understand the distinction between manageable and healed. Not as an achievement, not yet, but as a direction. A direction that a woman named Celestine Dumont was moving in and had been, without knowing she was, for 5 Tuesdays. And 1 Tuesday that was still coming, and whatever came after that. He sat on the floor with Boney in the apartment that listened, and he thought about next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. 6 days was manageable. Something else, he thought, something underneath the 6 days, quieter and truer and less managed. He was looking forward to it. He had not looked forward to something in 3 years. He sat with this for a long time. He let it be exactly as large as it was. He did not make it smaller. It was, he understood, the first thing he had not made smaller in a very long time. She had known since the 2nd Tuesday. She had kept singing because the song was for Boney and for her grandmother, and for the apartment that had been listening and finding nothing, and because a man lying still enough to hear it was a man who needed it, and she was a woman who did not withhold what was needed when she had it to give. He had faked sleep for 22 minutes because he had been afraid that if she knew he was there, the song would stop. They had both known, by the end, that the song was not going to stop. They had both kept going anyway, the way you kept going toward things that were true, in the right order, at the pace the truth required. Thank you for being here with us, quiet storm chasers and soul deep feelers. If this one reached somewhere tender in you, drop a like. Leave your city in the comments. Share it with someone who needed to hear a story about a crack in the armor and what came through it. Subscribe if you're new. We build worlds like this every week, and every one is different, and I want you here for all of them. Next time, a Korean Mafia boss's private driver quits on a Tuesday, and the only person who knows where he needs to be that afternoon is the parking attendant who's been watching him arrive and leave for 2 years and has never said a word. I'll see you there.